We just took a detour to learn about number systems, and we did this for good reason that will become clear in a moment. But before we took that detour, we wrote our very first CSS style rule that set the background color of our body element to be red. Now, we could have set the color to be anything we wanted, such as blue or gray or black or white or whatever, but we chose red. However, if we consider what this implies, it means that there are a very finite number of colors we can choose from when styling our web page. I mean, if we could only say red, blue, green, and things like that, then we're limited in our choice. And CSS actually provides a way for us to overcome this using things called hex codes. As the name implies, hex codes are based on hexadecimal numbers, and specifically a hex code is a string of 3 two-digit hexadecimal numbers. Each number represents an amount of a different color. The first is the amount of red, then the amount of green, then the amount of blue. Let's see an example of this by replacing our color red with the hex code. Here we can see the hex code is denoted by a hashtag followed by a 2-digit hexadecimal number indicating the amount of red, then a 2-digit hexadecimal number indicating the amount of green, and finally a 2-digit hexadecimal number indicating the amount of blue. So we just replaced our explicit red value with a hexadecimal code that equates to pure red. And as your intuition might be telling you, there are now a lot more colors and hues at our disposal than if we were required to just write simple explicit names as the values for our colors. In fact, there are 256 times 256 times 256 different values, different colors that we can use in CSS. Of course, figuring out how much red, green, and blue to use in our given CSS colors is cumbersome and not a very good use of our time. Thankfully, there are a lot of resources available online that give us the hex codes we might want. My personal favorite is this website, www.december.com, which if you Google things like green or blue or gray hex codes, it should be one of the first results on Google. And we can see that, for instance, gray hex codes, it provides a number of different hues and shades of gray that we might want to use in our web application. We aren't limited to only using hex codes. We can also use something called Rgb values. And Rgb values are similar, but rather than using a string of 2-digit hexadecimal numbers, it uses a comma-separated list of decimal numbers. And we can see this in action by replacing our hex code red with Rgb red. We note that Rgb is denoted by Rgb and then parentheses containing a comma-separated list of the amount of red, green, and blue we want in our color. Hex codes and Rgb values have one major flaw, which is that they are both fully opaque. To overcome this, we need one more type of color value, and that color value is called RGBA codes. And RGBA codes are very similar to RGB codes in that the first 3 values are the amount of red, green, and blue that we want in our color. But then there's this 4th value called the alpha value, and it can take on a value between 0 and 0.1 that indicates the amount of opacity we want in our color. So a value of 0 indicates that we want 100% transparency, and a value of 1 indicates that we want 100% opacity. Let's update our background color to be an RGBA value that has an alpha of 0.5. And of course, let's refresh our browser to see what the effect is. And we can see that indeed, changing the alpha value of our RGBA code increases the transparency of our background.